Hello, everyone. I'm going to be trying out a new format of video here. Just nothing super flashy or anything. I'm going to take a look at a random monster and break down what I think about its design, how it holds up to the creature building guidelines, and where it differentiates from them. And maybe people will like this video, and maybe they won't. But I felt like doing it, and life's tough right now, so nice little distraction, right? So let's get started. I have a wheel here with all of the with all of Monster Core's creatures, and we are going to go ahead and click on it and see what we get. We have the Soulbound Doll. We're going to go ahead and remove that and go to Monster Core. Whoops. Sorry about that. Somebody had just given me some stuff to help out on Ko-Fi, however you want to say it. Anywho, that's the building creatures page. That's not what I'm looking for. Soulbound Doll. There we go. So, we have the Soulbound Doll, which is this boy here. Let's go ahead and save that image. And we're going to put that up on the screen. All right. So now we've got him up on screen, and we can go back to his entry. So we've got the Soulbound Doll. It's a level 2 creature, tiny, construct, and soulbound, which is a relatively niche trait. These constructs are mentally augmented by a fragment of a once living creature's soul. Now, that doesn't tell us a whole lot, but it does mean that things that affect creatures with a spirit probably affect the Soulbound Doll, despite it being a construct, which are normally immune to things like spirit damage. And this is before we get into actually looking at its immunities and resistances and stuff. So that can just give us a little hint there. Traits are a great way for a lot of understanding to be passed on relatively quickly and modularly without having to type a bunch of stuff out a million times. Of course, everything on the wheel was from Monster Core, so this is on Monster Core, page 318. If you've got the book, you can go check it out and follow along. They are Perception 8 with Dark Vision. That's pretty normal. If we check Perception under here for level 2, 8 is a moderate perception. And I'm gonna move myself towards the edge a little bit because I'm in the way. Alright, so we got a perception of 8 in dark vision. Dark vision is very common on creatures. So is low light vision. There are very few creatures that do not have either. And that is just a factor in that darkness is very accessible, darkness is very easy to use, and this helps mitigate stealth. I don't always agree with that personally. I think that creatures should have more weaknesses in tune with the party's weaknesses, but a lot of player characters can also have dark vision, so it's not that uncommon. It speaks common, and one spoken by its creator, typically common. So one thing here that's not entirely clear to me, I'll be honest, is if this simply means one spoken by its creator, period, typically common, and that is simply reflected here, or if this is also one, if it gets common and one spoken by its creator. I'm gonna lean towards it being just the one language and it's shared by its creator, and this is just a reflection of that. But that's just my sort of expectation on that. I'm not in the other designers' heads. I have not spoken with many Paizo devs on the means of their design. I've mostly been working out things on my own. Has -2 strength. Of course, this is tiny, so they're dolls. Dolls. The image makes it look like it could be a bit bigger because of the lowered perspective, but they are tiny. They're little. So -2 strength, +4 dex, +3 con, 0 int, whiz of 2, and a charisma of 0. So they're observant. They have sort of a sense of self, but don't necessarily know how to project it. They're not necessarily learned. They're hardy. They're made out of non-living material and probably well built. They're quick and little, but they're not very strong. Personality fragments is a non-defensive, non-offensive ability. This is the utility section, normally reserved for special senses or things that don't always have much to do with combat, or at least are fairly neutral in whether or not they might be offensive or defensive. A Soulbound Doll shares fragments of its donor's soul's personality, though none of that creature's memories. So if the character whose soul was used in its creation was bubbly and bright and happy, they'll share in some of that aspect, but they don't remember anything that person did. They don't have memories kept in there. They might have the same affect, or they might seem reminiscent of their behavior, but they don't actually remember anything. This causes a Soulbound Doll to match a strong personality trait of the donor soul. See sidebar, which we will get to in a second. Because of its soul sliver, a Soulbound Doll is not immune to spirit damage, as most constructs are, which is, as we mentioned before, we got straight from the Soulbound trait. So down here, we have Soulbound personalities. And a Soulbound Doll's additional second rank innate spell depends on a strong personality trait and had in life, as listed below. So if the person was brave, they get large, which takes them from tiny straight up to large, which is like huge. You get calm from calm, augury from careful, harm from cruel, peaceful rest from gentle, disguise magic from impish, laughing fit from jolly, heal from kind, breathe fire from rash, dispel magic from sassy, and invisibility from timid. So they might fade away if embarrassed, and they might be like, oh no you didn't, if they were sassy, and just like, what magic, you know? But that is their first section. And I find that separating things by these sections was a really good idea on Paizo's part. It helps compartmentalize things. You'd normally also have items up here, if they have any. And these are sort of things that are intrinsic to the creature, but not necessarily an attack or a defense. It's just there. So they have an AC of 17, a Fortitude of 7, Reflex of 10, and Will of 6. And if we go over here and check in with our abilities, let's see, at level 2, 17 is moderate, and a 10 is high, 7 is moderate, 4 is low. So you notice that we have a 7 of moderate in fortitude, but we have a 6 in will. So a thing that a lot of people kind of get weirded out by with the tables in building creatures is a lot of creatures don't have these exact values. Sometimes they'll have a number in between these numbers, and there's ways to do that. The way that I look at it is often these I will look at first as a sense of, was my ability modifier low, moderate, high, or extreme to begin with. And then I choose the similar class there, low, moderate, high, extreme. And that is a good place to start. And those kind of tend to line up with if you have that score and a particular level of proficiency. Even though creatures don't technically use proficiency, it's still sort of there in the math. You can break it down and see where it might be. So will is 6, but fortitude is 7. And it's very easy because they started at moderate on both. And so you have a 3 here. Whereas on the ability modifier scales for level 2, 3 is moderate and 7 is moderate for a save. So this fortitude is directly in line with the moderate to moderate scale. But it has 1 wisdom lower. So moderate minus 1. And that's how it's done. These numbers can absolutely be arbitrated, and often are to some degree. They didn't have to choose moderate as the basis for its will save and then adjust it down for this. They could have left it 7, or they could have started it low and adjusted instead. But they didn't. They went with a high reflex because it's tiny and dexterous. And it's got a high con for being a tiny creature at moderate. And so they went moderate, and decided that its will should be moderate as well, but just a hair lower because the wisdom is a little lower. The difference between, say, like first edition or Pathfinder first edition or Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is that these numbers here are just a guideline for these numbers. They're not hard linked together. Whereas in those other games, they are. Now, the only thing that these numbers directly affect 99% of the time is untrained skills. So any skills that are not listed here, which it has acrobatics, occultism, and stealth. And I'll talk about its skills here in a little bit. And that's it. That's all these numbers do on their own. So it's got a -2 to athletics, for example. That's its whole athletics score is -2. It's got stealth but not thievery, so it's got +4 to thievery. But untrained, so it can't take trained actions with thievery. And so that's something to keep in mind with creature design as well. Moving on to its hit points, it has 23. Stop it, Nethys. Has 23 hit points. It has a bunch of standard construct immunities, which are bleed, death effects, disease, doomed, drained, fatigued, healing, non-lethal attacks, paralyzed, poisoned, sickened, unconscious, vitality, and void. Normally, most constructs are also immune to spirit damage. These are not. That's already been pointed out effectively twice to us by this point. Once softly and once very explicitly. And then its admission from this section is another explicit point that it is not immune. But pretty much all of these are very common for constructs. It has resistance to bludgeoning 3, piercing and 5, and slashing 3. Normally, you might see a construct just have resistance to physical and just have one of these numbers, but for whatever reason, they wanted piercing to be more resistant than the other two, so they split it up. This happens now and again. It's a little less concise, but when they're trying to tell a particular story, generally with constructs, it has to do with the materials they're made out of or how they're constructed. And I would imagine that this is perhaps because they might be made out of wood but too light to perhaps be chopped into very well, but they could be pierced into and wedged apart very well. And that would be my take from reading 353 here. And that might be the case. That might not be what they had in mind. I don't know. But that is my inference from the mechanic. That's my narrative inference from the mechanic. They have a speed of 20 feet, which isn't crazy slow. It's a little slower than average, but they're a tiny creature that does not have flight or supernatural speed. So it's not unusual. They have a fist plus 10, which, let's take a look at strikes. So I forgot to look at the HP. They have pretty low HP. They've got 23, which is in the low range, between 21 and 25. And I'll get into something about HP in a second too. But they have a plus 10 to hit. And our strike attack bonus is, moderate is 9 and high is 10. So they're straddling that line. You can do that too. Another thing that they might be doing is technically looking at it as a straddling of high and extreme -2. So you've got 13 and 11. Between that would be 12. -2 is 10. But most likely, they probably skipped that part of the thought process and went just in between these as a determination, potentially, for their damage. They have reach of 0 feet like most tiny creatures. So they do have to be in your space to attack. But this is agile and finesse and magical at level 2. Not that that part matters that much, but it's not nothing. So for strike damage at level 2, 1d6 plus 3 or 6 is average. They're dealing 1d6 plus 2, which is slightly below. So they're dealing an average of 5 damage. On an agile finesse attack with relatively high accuracy. So this is kind of low, but they also have magic. And if they're a brave Soulbound Doll, they're going to get a boost to that damage. They're going to get a boost to reach. And they're going to be significantly more intense. And the others, it's going to be a little more like dependent, because a lot of these don't have much to do in combat, at least not much to do to help them. They can cast levitate, so they can bounce around a room for a little while should they need to. And then they get light, prestige, and telekinetic hand, which are all semi-narrative spells for them. They don't need to produce light unless they're helping someone. They can do all sorts of stuff with prestige. Prestige is a very versatile and useful spell, and telekinetic hand can help them lift things at a distance. But they don't have much in the way of attack. Cruel souls give them harm. They get breathe fire if they were rash, and they get enlarge if they were brave. Calm can be useful. Heal if you've got undead members of the party or a necromancer of some kind. But most of this is not going to have any real effect on combat. So they don't deal much damage. They've got really mediocre defenses, low HP, although low HP isn't uncommon on things with this many immunities, as well as resistances and no weaknesses. So they're kind of going, well, here's our average values, but we're going to go on the low side because it's going to resist 90% of damage that's thrown at it. And so I don't think that Soulbound Dolls are built to be a combat creature for the most part. They can be a little bit, but I think for the most part, they are meant to be something that helps facilitate a narrative and a story. We'll go back to the skills now. They don't have any charisma-based skills, even, and like, well, not too surprising out of a 0 charisma creature, they're not mindless. So it would be very easy to say, oh, well, actually, this specific Soulbound Doll does have a charisma score and has a skill. But as a baseline, they have stealth, acrobatics, and occultism. Oops, I accidentally hit that. And so these skills are going to be, it kind of understands its situation with occultism, like a little bit, It's an unusual little thing, and this probably has mostly to do with how its soul interacts with its construct nature. It's very good at stealth for its size, or for its level. I think skill bonus of 8 is high for level 2. Yes, so that's high for level 2. And acrobatics is high. So acrobatics is really important for it getting into people's spaces without provoking reactive strikes, and things like that. And also for it balancing. So these things are very good at being like up in rafters, or because they're so small, balancing along ropes and chains and the tops of small like bits of furniture. And they're really good at being maneuverable in places where you can't even follow them. Acrobatics would also be useful for them to squeeze. So they're very good at getting into places where, you know, a medium or even small creature might have to break something or pick a lock or something. They can just weasel their little bodies in there pretty well. And of course, they're good at hiding. And frankly, like from a narrative perspective, you might give them even more bonus to this if they're just pretending to be a doll. Like, or even if you don't give them a bonus, let them hide in plain sight so long as it's not already obvious that they're alive, or animate at least. So those are things that normally there is some sort of mechanical reflection, like in Gargoyle or something like that, but you can still do stuff like that just from a narrative perspective. And I think that there's room for it here. Overall, for a level 2 creature, it's slightly on the weak side. I think it does lean more towards a narrative driving creature or a minion creature, where it's sort of the add-ons to something bigger. And I think that's probably a good way to put it, or to use it, is to have a creature to which it has an attachment. Perhaps it's a guardian of them, or it follows them around. And maybe that creature is either more or less dangerous. But especially, say, a child or an elderly person to whom this person doesn't share any memories of them, but maybe they still feel attached because of the personality of their soul donor. And they'll follow them around and protect them. And a level 2 creature protecting you is nothing to sneeze at, like, realistically. So this surprisingly deadly tiny doll can be very helpful to a common person. And it can help drive a very early game mystery, or even act as a guide of any level to the party. Because, again, they're likely more of a narrative driver than a combat driver. And that's fine. Some creatures are built to do that. I think the main points of its weakness come from, again, its broad defenses while still being quite low level and being intelligent. Normally, there's a counterbalance between intellect and statistics at low levels, because at higher levels, it's not so strange when, you know, the skeleton or zombie or construct acts intelligently. But at really low levels, when a creature can act intelligently and be very resistant to a lot of things that either the players may not have caught on to yet or don't have ways around, they can be pretty strong that way. And this isn't going to be too deadly to your party if, you know, you throw it in while they're level 1. Like, if it's 1-on-1, it might be dangerous. It might be pretty dangerous. But even 2-on-1 or 3-on-1, it's not going to be that big a deal at level 1. Just because it isn't overtuned for its level. It's slightly on the low end. It's like a mid-low creature. And I think that they're pretty cool. Like, I liked Soulbound Dolls, and I can't remember what they were called in 1E, but the bigger ones. And I always thought that they were really cool for the narrative. But that's my general summary. So, yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. I know this is kind of rambly, but I hope you liked the video, and I hope you liked the idea. If not, or if you did, please let me know. I'm probably gonna go right into recording another one, and maybe I'll be a little less random. But we'll see. Until next time, peace.